right in front of me, looking at me with all the love of all the universes, was Jesus. And I knew him. Like, he wasn't the figure on the cross that I had seen in the Catholic Church. He wasn't the little child, in the mother's arms. This was Jesus. And I knew him. Like, I remembered him. Like, there was just instant. It's like, I know you. And what amazed me was that he knew me too.
Thanks for joining me today on the Peaceful Presence podcast. I'm Olivia Figuered. Sorry about my voice today. My guest is Bridget Cook Burch. She's an international best-selling author, a speaker, and she's the founder of Your Inspired Story. Bridget has helped countless people bring their stories to life and uncover the deeper meaning within them. But today, you're going to hear her story, and it's a story of a near-death experience, an encounter with Jesus, and then the life-changing truths that she brought back with her from that experience. And what she learned can bring clarity and comfort and perspective to, I think, anyone who's navigating a heavy season or searching for some deeper meaning. And before we dive in, I would just love to ask for your support by subscribing to this podcast. It does help spread more messages of hope and miracles and faith to people who need encouragement. Well, Bridget, I'm just so happy to have you on my show today. And to those of you listening, I apologize in advance about my voice today, but I really wanted to have this conversation with you. I heard your story a couple of times, and I know you had a near-death experience where you had an encounter and met Jesus. But something that really stood out to me that I believe you have grown from your experience is in this expanded love and respect for people, even people that the world would label as difficult or bad. And that message, when I heard your story, it really struck me because I feel like that's something that God has been speaking to me about over and over lately, because I think that at our core, we are all connected. And if we would start seeing each other that way, I think it would really change our world. And that truth comes out in your story. So, and I would say, speaking of stories, I know you have a beautiful gift of sharing stories and also drawing stories out of people. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But maybe you could just start off with sharing with my audience a little bit about yourself and then take us back to where your story of that encounter began.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, Olivia, I'm really honored to be here. Just super excited to talk with you and your audience today. And it's such an honor to be with people who recognize that there's a bigger force at play, a greater goodness that surrounds us and wants the best for us. And I think that's really beautiful about who you are and what your story is all about. So thank you. So I'm really attracted to stories. I was an avid reader from the time I was a little girl, and books helped raise me, along with some adoptive parents that were really amazing. But I had been adopted when I was 6 months old, and I was on my third set of parents. So my birth parents had given me up, and then I had foster parents, and then my adoptive parents. So I grew up not even realizing I had a deep, deep wound where I just thought, what was so wrong with me that I had to be given up? I loved my adoptive parents, still do. They're just like so precious to me. But inside, I was like, I must not have been enough, like not pretty enough, not smart enough, not good enough, somehow not enough that they had to give me away. And that story drove a lot of my decisions in life and relationships. And, I was always waiting for the big people to leave. So I was fiercely independent. I didn't know how to trust. And I was scared of people, but I really wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove that there was something within me. And so, I set out to do well in school because my adoptive parents were very strong about education. And, they were mom and dad to me. and I wanted to please mom and dad. And at the same time, the wound often spoke louder than the love in the home. And so I'd go out into the world and be crazy. I was a partier for quite a long time. I grew up Catholic in a Mormon town, and so I already had a reputation before I hit junior high and had older siblings with a reputation, and so it was just kind of expected whether I wanted it or not. Um, and I got into sports for a while, and instead of the wild drinking, I would just carry a cup of water. But I still, I wanted to be loved and I wanted to love people and hang out with them. So, I'd drink my water and pretend it was a beer and do those things. But I still headed off to college after high school and just trying to survive and prove myself at the same time. So I'd take on, way too many credits in school and I couldn't afford it. And so I started working 3 jobs. I was working construction, I was working nights at a gas station, and then I was working as a waitress
Um,
in 2 different places and just barely scraping by and actually oftentimes going into debt for a period of time, and I didn't know what to do to get out of it, but I wouldn't ask anyone for help either.
yeah.
And,
Like an
started really.
overachiever?
Yes.
Sure. Can I ask you
But
one question, just
yeah.
as I'm hearing your story? So you were adopted by these parents at 6 months,
Mhm.
and so this message of, like, trying to prove yourself or where that void was really began that early.
It did. It
Yeah,
really did.
uh Alright, well, ca so carry on. So you're working the 3 jobs and not asking anybody for help and going to school, taking on more in terms of classes and debt and
In debt and, my parents were helpful when it came to education. And trying to support all of us through school, but we were expected that we were also going to make our own way, and I was failing at it. And then I started failing in my grades, and I was failing in my relationships. I wasn't close to mom and dad. They couldn't trust me, I couldn't trust myself, and it just became this really vicious cycle, and the more I sought to prove myself, the further I was going down the drain. Just I didn't have enough time, energy to please everyone that I was trying to please, and, I wanted to be a strong achiever. I wanted to get really good grades. I wanted to be all kinds of things, and I didn't know how to do it. And, what I was doing was literally making myself sick. I got, from anxiety, started to getting pains in my abdomen, my stomach, but what I didn't know was that because I wasn't addressing it, it was getting worse and worse, and then pretty soon I had fissures and ulcers in my colon and I got sepsis, but I didn't know what was going on. All of a sudden, I just knew that I was so sick. Olivia, I was up at college and I could barely drag myself out of bed and I was completely emaciated. I couldn't keep anything down, no water, no food. And I just wanted my mom.
Mm,
And yet at the same time, it was like, how can I show up on her doorstep? This
yeah.
wretch of a person who's failing everything. Like, they'd given me everything, and I was blowing it.
It's like so much
And
pressure that you put on yourself. I can, feel that.
it
Mhm.
was intense, and
How
just the
how long was the sickness going on for? Do you recall?
well, I remember I'd had those pains, which turned out later I found out was irritable bowel syndrome, but I didn't know. I just knew that I was carrying all my stress and anxiety and frustration in my belly. That's all I knew, and then I would run and lift weights and go to work and go to school and just ignore it. And so, but I lost like 30 pounds in 3 days. I took the last $5 that I had from my last shift, working as a waitress, put some fuel in my truck, and drove down a very steep canyon that I had no business being in as sick as I was. And so I just barely make it to my mom's, and I'm pulling up in her driveway, and all I can tell you is that I just remember, like, you know, I want her love so much, and I'm not worthy of any of this. Like, it was so difficult just to know that I was completely off the mark, and I had I had grown up Catholic. I wanted to become a nun, but I didn't feel like I was worthy to be a nun. So I had set that dream aside. I set all these things aside. But I knew I was off the mark. I just didn't know how to get back on. And now I'm this sick. So in very much surrender, I knock on my mom's door, and fortunately for me, she was a very loving person. She took one look at me and she said, "You're not well. I'm taking you to the doctor right now." So she scooted me into her car and off we went to the doctor's office. And I collapsed. Like all of a sudden, everything just hit. And fortunately, the doctor was right next to the hospital. They rushed me into emergency surgery. They found the sepsis and they pumped out pints and pints and pints of this infection. And then they couldn't give me a regular IV, so they had to give me what's called a subclavian, which is right near the heart. So I have this IV here, and they gave me 6 or 7 different intravenous antibiotics. And, I should have started getting better right away, but I still had these super high fevers, 106, 107, and they're worried about brain damage, and they couldn't get it to come down for very long, and they're like, "She should be getting better." But what we didn't know was one of the antibiotics was killing me,
Mm.
and I was allergic to it, but had never had it before. No one knew. So all I knew, I was getting sicker, and I would have some periods of lucidity, including when, the roommate that I had behind the curtain, she and her husband started talking, and they were, reading from something called the Big Book, which is part of the 12-step program, and I had taken that because as that partier, there was a part of me that wanted to become closer to God, and I was addicted to taking care of people who were addicted.
Mhm.
And I recognized I had a problem, so I went to a 12 steps group, and it had for a while given me some hope about my life, but just made me want to prove more at the
Right.
time. But I heard these words about God, and it stirred a little bit of hope in me. So later we had some experiences. She came out from surgery and she could feel every cut and every stitch, and her body wasn't accepting the medication. And I didn't know I was empathic, that I could feel other people's feelings super intensely. It was something I'd grown up with, but I'd kind of pushed aside.
Mhm.
And I was so raw and vulnerable in my hospital bed that I'm hearing her writhing in pain, and I could feel it in my own body. I felt so bad for her. And then her husband and a member of their clergy of their church came and gave her a blessing. And I heard her sigh, and I heard her fell asleep, and all the pain that I was feeling in my body, it left. And I
Oh.
thought, that was crazy, but it
Mhm.
was also undeniable in its power, and I thought, "Oh, okay." And then I was just trying to survive, but later on, my mother left for the first time after days of staying at the hospital, and she went home to be with my dad and take care of him for a little bit, and it was like, um, 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's these 2 nurses that were talking outside in the corridor, and they said, "I think we better call her mom back because Bridget is not gonna make it until morning." And Olivia, I just remember, like, the most deep, raw vulnerability, even deeper than trying to drag myself to my mother's front porch because all of a sudden it was like, I'm I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it until morning. And my heart was so sad. It was grieving. And I realized I hadn't fulfilled the measure of my creation, like what I came here for. I hadn't done it. And I had no freaking idea what that was, no idea at all, but I knew I hadn't done it. And so there was this deep yearning and sorrow inside of me. And my neighbor had heard the nurses as well. And she's like, "So, Bridget, you know you're dying, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." And it was like one of those Mack truck moments.
Mm.
My mom had brought in the priest earlier that day and he'd given me a blessing. And I felt a little bit better, like if I lived or died, that it would be okay. But it was just, it was unsettled in my mind. But she had her husband come and another member of their clergy, middle of the night, and they gave me a blessing, and it was like night and day. And all I can tell you is I think that it had to do with my mother's prayers, with their willingness to serve, and with this yearning in my heart
Mm.
to actually live, to not die without having done what I came to do, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It totally
And
does, and that's amazing to me that I mean, you're not the first person that said that, but when you're at that moment that you know without knowing what it is, but you know that you haven't fulfilled your purpose, and just goes to show that we all, if we're here, we're created for something, and I think that's beautiful.
yeah, and like I said, I had no clue what in the world that might be, but I just knew I hadn't done it.
Yeah.
And I fell asleep for a time, and when I woke up, my whole entire room was just filled with this blinding, beautiful, alive white light and just this energy.
Mm.
And it was unconditional love. And the reason I knew that was because here is right in front of me, looking at me with all the love of all the universes, was Jesus. And I knew him. Like, he wasn't the figure on the cross that I had seen in the Catholic Church. He wasn't the little child, in the mother's arms. This was this was Jesus. And I knew him. Like, I remembered him. Like, there was just instant. It's like, I know you. And what amazed me was that he knew me too. And he knew all my foibles, all my frailties, all my mistakes, and he didn't care. He didn't care how depleted my bank account was, what my grades were, what my destroyed relationships were. Like, he just was there loving me, looking me in the eyes and knowing everything. It blew me out of the water.
Mhm.
And like, the incredible thing that I will never, ever forget and never deny was I'm, basking in a love that I had never experienced. Like, my parents were very loving, but this was so powerful, so unconditional, and just I felt wrapped in his presence, and everything in the room was vibrating.
Mm.
Like, everything was vibrating with his love. The my skin, my hospital gown, the blankets. I will forever remember the metal tray table. It's supposed to be this solid thing, and the atoms of this tray table were vibrating with his love. It blew me out of the water.
Yeah.
And I had some sorry, I get so emotional. I had some really tender moments of him recognizing me and loving me, and what I got to see in his eyes was like universes of knowledge, um, a recognition that there is more, so much more to life than what we see as messy humans, so much more to this earth, to the universe that we're in, and that, like, the expanding multiple universes that are out there. It's just crazy incredible, and, uh, I felt like I knew everything when I looked into his eyes. I wish I could have taken that with me
Mhm.
because there was a point when I came out of my body and I was watching him looking at me, and I could feel that I was a part of everything, of all creation. It was so undeniable. I I didn't even know what to do with it. It just like filled me. And then came back into my body, still feeling as I looked in his eyes that I understood it all, that I knew it all, that I knew what he knew, that he was passing on all this incredible information, and what what I would never forget. I would forget so much. Like I held on to a tiny sliver, but I would never forget how powerful his unconditional love was. And it changed me, changed the story that I had been telling myself up until that very moment of I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not, I shouldn't be here. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I am nothing but dust under God's heel. And suddenly the narration was so different. The narrative was pure and strong and beautiful. And I fell asleep. And when I woke up, my fever was down, and the nurse comes wheeling in. She's got all these antibiotics that are lined up to plug into that subclavian. And I said, "Hey, I can have every single one of these, but I cannot have this one." And I pointed to one that was wrapped in foil and it was cold. And I just knew it. She looked at me like I was nuts. She's like, "Girl, we thought we were gonna lose you last night. This is the only thing saving your life is these antibiotics. You have to have them." I said, "Can't have that one. I cannot have that one." And it was the craziest thing because when Jesus was in my room, he told me I was being given a second chance at life. And I took that with me. But when I woke up, that's what I remembered. But suddenly I knew about the antibiotics and the doctors didn't know and the nurses didn't know. Like
Mhm.
it was an undeniable miracle because I said, I cannot have it. So she rushes off to tell the doctor that I am crazy. I'm a French fry shy of a Happy Meal. Like there's just no way this girl, she's going to survive. And he fortunately had had other patients who'd had near death experiences. He came to talk with me, asked me to tell him how I knew, and I shared with him, and he's like, "Well, okay, you're on all the rest of these. We'll take you off this one and see what happens."
Yeah.
And the next day, in 24 hours, I was able to walk out of that hospital with my mom under my own power, and I was forever changed.
I love this story. Not the story, I love the experience. And what does it tell you now? Like, thank God your doctor had the wherewithal and had heard of this before and trusted your knowledge. But what does it tell you about, gosh, a lot of doctors out there might say, no, you must do this, and just kind of our limited way of thinking, because clearly it was this enveloping of love that really healed you. I mean, not to say that there's not the medicinal piece of it too, but what has that taught you about any ailments that people are going through? And let me back that up a little bit, because as you were sharing your story earlier, I'm also thinking about what you were experiencing. And it's like, do you believe that stress that you were carrying outwardly was manifesting inwardly?
Absolutely. I know that to be true. Like, I
Mhm.
had held my stress there, and what I literally was doing was eating my body from the inside out. It's
Yeah.
like people who struggle with, uh, diseases
Mhm.
that are inflammatory in nature and their body is essentially eating itself. It generally has to do with the thoughts that they've had about themselves. And, it's been shown that childhood trauma and even some adult trauma can help us to think things about ourselves that are not true.
Mhm.
and we end up manifesting it in our body. Louise Hay has done a lot of work on this. There's a lot of more modern day scientists who've done a lot of work on this, Greg Braden and others, and recognizing that our thoughts are so powerful as a child of the creator, that we create our own reality even in our bodies.
Mhm.
And it just, I really do believe that, and I had been taught that, medical doctors in Western medicine was, like, next to God. You didn't go against what they said, you didn't, you didn't go against their orders by any means, you followed precisely what they told you, from prescription to whatever, and so, it was the very first time that I spoke up on behalf of my own body
Mhm.
with that knowing, and it was so strong, but man, I had to summon all the courage, but I knew, just like I knew him, I knew that one was killing me, and so what I took forward from that was that, 2 things. It took me a while to recognize that I had manifested that in my body from stress. Usually I'd been taught that, you just developed certain things and then the doctors took care of it, right? Or you didn't survive. Um, it would take me a while to recognize the correlation of that. And the second thing was to, for the first time really, to be able to take a stand for my own body. And that was really a big thing, without running away from it, without lying about it, without hiding from it. When I had young men that were attracted to me, and if I didn't want to be in a physical relationship with them, I would make up excuses or run and hide because I just didn't know how to take a stand.
Yeah.
And so this was the first time to
Mm.
have a boundary and say, I cannot and I will not. And so it was part of what
Oh,
helped change, my own story, my own worth,
yeah.
that maybe someone outside of me didn't know better than I knew, because I knew Christ knew.
Yeah. It empowered you. Yeah. How has it changed now? Because I imagine as you've, gone through life, you have you're human. I'm sure you've had some stressful situations in life, and how has this experience now changed how you manage that or deal with that?
Well, I appreciate that. Um For myself, sometimes I'm still stubborn. Sometimes I will put my physical body last. But I'm very well aware of what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. And
Mhm.
so I take 1,000% accountability for my health. It's not in anyone else's hands except mine. I treasure what Western medicine can bring, but I also believe in the power of prayer. I believe in a lot of Eastern practices, meditation, and changing our body through our thoughts, like Dr. Joe Dispenza and several others that come from the scientific, but then they meld the spiritual with the scientific, and they're coming up with all kinds of incredible evidence. Some of
Mhm.
the incredible evidence is just like what my doctor saw right before him is, oh, she can walk out of the hospital on her own power. And the only thing that changed was taking away that antibiotic.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that went on my medical record, and I won't allow myself to have that. But in moving forward too, like teaching my own daughters and my son about, stopping and feeling inside your body for your truth before you make a decision, before you make a medical decision, before you choose a prescription or a supplement or, something else. And so
Mhm.
that actually is a really good skill set that I'm delighted to have taken away.
Yeah, I love that you said that, stop and feel, because I shared with you before we started recording. I walked down this cancer journey with my sister for a couple of years, and man, you can sure go down a rabbit hole, not just in that, but in anything, as you're trying to better yourself, there's a myriad of things to choose from. And at some point, you look at all of it. I mean, I can't tell you how many things we purchased, and it's exhausting. And then you just kind of have to take a step back sometimes and think, like, is this really what I need? And so I love that you lean into feeling that. Um, the message that I really loved that you shared was kind of about this overall love and respect for people I often go on walks, and I feel like that's when God speaks to me, and I've shared this before here, but one day I'm on a walk and he just pulled me towards a tree, and I'm just staring at this tree, and I'm looking at it, and it is just that, it kinda had to do with imposter syndrome a little bit, but, beyond that, it was just that we're all one, we're all coming from this same trunk and these same roots. These roots are in this other, you know, area that we don't see. But you're branched here with this group of friends, and I'm over here, and I'm in this part of the world, and then we've got those little leaves that are the people that whose voices resonate with us, and it really. I used to be a news junkie. I'm pivoting here, um, and I used to work for the news as well, and I just. The more I started to see that we are just really all alike and everybody's just operating on their own branch and what they're taught and their experience, it really turned me off from wanting to listen to all the drama anymore and all these things that keep us in this divided state. And so when I heard your story before, you touched on that a little bit. And you can speak from this experience, not from a tree talking to you. Um, but I wanted you to touch on that a little bit because I really admired how I think you had heard just respecting people um, and kind of even those that might look dark or bad, trying to bring out
Mhm.
the light. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I've had a lot of extraordinary experiences about with regarding the darkness and the light. And um, so first of all, the story that I had been telling myself, I mentioned that I was able to shift and change because it was like, oh, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of tremendous blessings and gifts and things like that. But not but, and, um, for the first time in my life, I was able to look in the mirror and see love there in my own eyes, and that was such a gift and a miracle. But the greatest thing that I experienced was, uh, to be able to go out into the world and to look into anyone's eyes, and I would see, like, I have to be careful of my words here because it's I would see God's love there. I would see the mark of their creation there. It was as if I could see through God's eyes, like, oh my goodness, this is an incredible creation. And it didn't matter where they came from, that I could see that. And I was no longer afraid of people. Like I recognized that people could be violent, they could still have patterns, they could still do things, but I could see in their eyes like their very soul, and I would know who they were,
Mm,
and I would know who they weren't, just the games they were playing in life, especially for survival. I saw a lot of that. Like what people do, as you mentioned, coming from these different trees and branches and the beliefs that they've grown up with. And there's a lot of us versus them mentality out there. Like, it's our us against the whole world. And that's very prevalent in so many societies and families and organizations. But I was working at the YWCA and started writing some newsletters for them and writing some articles. And I would notice these particular groups of young men and women that were coming in, and you could tell from their countenance and their protectiveness and some of the things that they lived through, survived through some hell and high water.
yeah.
And but when I could connect with them, when I could ask them questions without judgment, just loving them like I'd been loved, just being open to what they had to say, and I began to see the threads of their stories, of what their beliefs were, but also where they were going, like what could be. In storytelling, we call it conflict character arc, where you're a victim of your beliefs in the beginning, things you've been told, and like me, what I believed about myself, and we're all the victim of some of these things. But on the other side of our heroes and sheroes journey, we have an opportunity as an adult, in particular, to say, I'm going to be a victor over this. I'm going to discover my own truth. I'm going to do something marvelous with this. And a lot of us are somewhere on that hero's journey. And so I would see these kids, a product of their environment, and a lot of them were gang kids, like mom and dad are gangbangers and, grandma and grandpa and aunt and uncle. And they grew up violent. They didn't know that there was another way until maybe a mentor or someone else in a program or an uncle or an aunt or someone would say, "You are so much more than this." And I would watch this light come on inside of their souls, and I would see them begin to make different choices, especially when I went to work for community learning centers. I got to interview these kids that were doing their very best, but I would see that transformation in front of my eyes, and oh boy, did I fall in love with the human soul
Right.
and began to write these stories. And then because of that trajectory, and also having to look at my own darkness and be able to find light in their stories as well as my own, I learned so much. My first
Mhm.
book was about a former skinhead who changed his life. And, but he was a very mad, angry, furious, violent skinhead. And then he became a dad, and his whole world transformed. And what he wanted for his boys is what he never had for himself. And I got to write about his transformation, not through the eyes of judgment that I once would have had or fear, but actually from love. And that book transformed me. I also had to walk into my own dark, which I had
Yeah.
always shied away from. And then my next book was about the daughter of a serial killer and how she was able to overcome the skeletons in her closet, that darkness, and find her own light, her own joy, her own connection to God and to truth. And that was really significant. And that book came out on Oprah and Dr. Phil and CNN and Good Morning America. But I believe that it was because we chose to be of service. And it set me on this extraordinary path. I've written a book about the 19th wife of 65 women, how she overcame this cult in the name of God and was able to help free an entire 10,000 people from, the stranglehold of someone who reminded me a lot of Hitler. And you were mentioning like how how do we how do we look into the dark? Because everybody has some inside of them. And how do we not be afraid of what we see there? And also, how do we love without judgment? And honestly, I think that is one of the biggest lessons for our time. Um, it is definitely where I've had some of my biggest lessons. In fact, you mentioned your this journey you went on with your sister. And I had a similar thing with my father before he passed away from cancer. I was telling him that, at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, that there were some doctors that were teaching people, just like you and I talked about earlier before the broadcast, about how sometimes these hard things can actually lead us to an incredible life of joy, something different than we could ever imagine. And I was trying to bring this out to my dad, and I said, "Dad, they're having their patients think of a beautiful far off goal and then start doing something physical towards that, like mountain climbing or, something else." And he loved to travel, so I was trying to talk him into thinking about a trip he wanted to take with his mom. But his engineer left brain ego came out and he said, "Bridget, I'm not dumb enough to think that I can think my way out of cancer." And I just said, "Okay, Dad, I understand." And so I didn't push him on it. And then he passed from his cancer. And a few years later, when I was working on The Witness Wore Red about that 19th wife, he showed up as an angel, but in a very different capacity. We called him our red angel. There were a lot of blessings that came, including the title of that book. And one day, my daughter uh, she had fallen asleep at the wheel of my car, and on her way home from work, and she hit a tree. But she was so lucky that she was going uphill and she was alive, and that's all I cared about. But I was also a single mom, and I had 3 kids to take care of, and I was still trying to prove myself in my own ways, differently than I had before, but still, working at that. And she, and all I had to purchase a vehicle was the insurance money from this was so it was $5,000 was all I had. And I thought, there is no way I'm going to be able to get a 4-wheel drive to get up into our mountainous little house. And, how am I going to do this? But a miracle happened, and a friend of mine at an auction found this red Dodge truck and, brought it to me, and I just couldn't believe it. It was amazing. So I go to pick up my mom for a doctor's appointment, and she walks out, Olivia, and she stopped all of a sudden, and she said, "Your dad would have loved that truck." And all of a sudden, I heard him laughing in the background, and I'm like, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" And he said, "Would you have believed me?" Because of our one of our final conversations about cancer, and so I wouldn't have believed him, but he'd learned so much on the other side. And then, another time he came back to me and I did believe him, Olivia, because he was, I was doing a meditation in a group, and I went way far off from what that guided meditation was, and all of a sudden, here's my dad. He's in a tux, and he's dancing with my grandmother. And, the 2 of them had not always gotten along in life because he took my mother from Michigan out to Utah to be an engineer, and she was furious with him. And so they hadn't always gotten along, but here they are dancing. And my grandfather is in a tux and he's watching the 2 of them dance. And my father said, "The games we play in life," meaning how we make the us versus them, as you were talking about, how we look at others through the eyes of judgment and anger and all of the emotions. And here they were both smiling. And then he showed me this prayer that I had been saying, which is every day, "God, please help me see with your eyes and hear with your ears and feel with your heart. And when prompted, let me speak with your words or write them." And my dad showed me this prayer, and he showed me like all this light around me from this prayer and all the ways that it had been making a significant difference in my life. And these things, it was very humbling and it was really beautiful. And then, Olivia, there was this black wall. It was from the light to this black wall. It was so shocking. I didn't know what to do with it. I was so taken aback, and I'm like, "Dad, what is that?" And he said, "Come over here. I want you to see what's behind this wall." And behind that wall was the serial killer whose daughter I had written about. And, here I am saying this prayer, "Let me see through your eyes, God." But I had withheld my love from him. I didn't wanna feel, I didn't wanna see, I didn't wanna hear. I didn't want to give love to him because I was mad at him for what he'd done to these women, what he'd done to his own daughter, and the twisting in his own way of both his daughters and his son. And I was mad at him, so I didn't hate him, and I'd forgiven him to a degree, but I withheld my own love. And my dad said, "How much warmth and love do you think he receives behind those prison walls?" And so ever after, because I am not afraid of the dark, and so I have a lot of authors who will bring me really transformational stories, but oftentimes there is a lot of darkness at a certain point in their story, and I'm not afraid of it. But also look for the light in anyone's eyes, the Warren Jeffs, the the Keith Hunter Jesperson, the happy face serial killer. I when I have the opportunity, I will look for love. And, I had an extraordinary experience
Can I
where I had
ask
one of
can I ask you,
um,
just anyone listening, how do you do that? Like, how does the average person look for the love?
I think it's I think it's important to listen, because if I go on my own way, like, I create chaos on my own. So even in my mission statement, for myself, it starts with, "In partnership with God." And so when I stop, when I take a breath, when I ask to be in co-creation, in partnership, it shifts things. So, I was gonna tell you, because it is a very human story. I have a client, and we were working on her book, and her father had been murdered by one of his own men on a naval vessel. And, she had been afraid of this man her entire life. And, we found him, and I had the opportunity to go interview him. And we had a bodyguard and a getaway car and a whole story that developed, like, in order to keep her and I safe. And, when we went up to the doorstep, I was supposed to tell this story, and immediately Spirit overcame me and said, "Tell the truth." So I told the truth of who I was, and I said, "I don't think anybody has actually gotten the full story. I don't think anybody knows what the truth is from your eyes." And we proceeded to have a 7.5-hour interview. I wouldn't have done that on my own. I would have done what the bodyguard said to do. I would have made up that lie. I would have come from that place. And instead, I was told to tell the truth, and that even meant to love. So I listened to him for 7.5 hours. And then I left him my business card, of all things. And everybody was like, "Are you crazy?" Because this was a gentleman who had murdered, and people didn't know if he was crazy or on drugs or both. And through that 7.5 hours, I found out the truth. And when he passed away, his his sister found that card and contacted me. And I was able to tell the family that he was gone, and they didn't see him the same way that I saw him in that 7.5 hours, but it was able to dispel a 40-year legacy of fear. All I can tell you is the average person can work miracles by coming from love instead of judgment. And I still hold my judgments. I try not to, very hard. But whenever I do, God will bring me a story.
I mean, what a beautiful gift, to be able to do that, and then also just I would imagine that all these stories that you're hearing, you're just seeing the full pendulum of the human spirit, and what it's able to do and how it can transform once somebody brings out the light and the love in them. It's funny, like, kind of along the same message as I try to read the Bible a little bit every day, and that message about it's constantly in the Bible about the body of Christ, and
Mhm.
that's us, and and there's so many. You were talking about your experience in the hospital where everything was vibrating in energy, and there's so many pieces to just our human body. And if you were to, like, boil it down to just the atoms that are inside of us to make us function, collectively, we are all the body. And, one piece of the body over here doesn't quite understand how this works down at on your feet to your hand. But if we all kind of walk in our calling and we can all bring out that light in each other, then our body's gonna work well, just like our human body. When something's kinda out of whack, it throws the rest of our body out of whack. So, it's really important to start seeing that light and that calling and that gift that's in each of us so that our little piece of the body can work and collectively have a body that works. And, that again just is that message of unity and being able to show people that transformation is possible and that there's good
Mhm.
inside of them, as dark
And
as it
getting
might be.
good inside of everyone, no
Mhm.
matter how dark. Yeah.
Yeah. And what gifts that you've had to be able to see your father and have those visions and, when you after your experience, did you come back with any heightened abilities or, skills that you didn't have before?
Think, just 2 things. One was, the desire to love the way that I'd been loved
Mhm.
unconditionally, and so I love to take that out into the world anywhere I can. And oftentimes in stories, it's so important because people are afraid to share their foibles, their mistakes, but it's part of what makes them gloriously beautiful and human.
Mhm.
So I love to share that. But the other thing I think is this ability to see the threads of story and also to see people how God loves them, like
Yeah.
just how magnificent they are. Sometimes I don't see the games people play in life, but I see how they are so incredible. And I also often get a sense of how much they are loved from the other side.
Mhm.
It's very humbling.
I bet. So since you've had a little glimpse or a taste of, I guess, reality beyond this world, what how does that make you different now in your day-to-day as you operate through this life?
Well, I will tell you that I'm still a messy human.
Mhm.
My husband and my kids will be able to tell you just how human I am and how many mistakes I make. Um, but I will tell you that I am definitely a different person than the one who entered that hospital room. And one of the things I once heard Mother Teresa say, I am the pen in the hand of a God who is writing a love letter to the world. And I just thought, "Holy cow, that's me, not the nun, and definitely not Mother Teresa." But just this human being able to be the pen in the hand of a God who is writing a love letter to the world, and that is the most significant difference in who I was and who I was able to become. I think it's a part of fulfilling the measure of my creation is to
Yeah.
just love to help people bring out stories of transformation and what is possible for us.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of, like you said, you had to turn off the news. The news and other things are so full of our limitations as humans, our hatred, our, all the things that are going wrong. And I just would like to suggest that there's so many things that are going right. There's so much beauty that's able to be in the world. And I honestly think that we've been all the things that have ever happened to us have brought us together for such a time as this.
Yeah.
As the body, we are in a unique position and time to bring incredible light into the world. And I think we may have just had to traverse our worst darkness, this hatred among each other, to recognize, is this the way I really want to live? Or am I going to be open to see some other ways of living? And I've watched how stories bring down the walls, that they bring us together. The little news bites create more hatred, but the stories, we take the time to really listen to one another. It's like what you said. We find we are more alike than anything different. And then we find that we love what is different about each other. And we might not agree still with someone else, but we understand why they think and feel the way they feel. And our judgment goes way down, and our love for them and for the planet goes up.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, we need more powerful stories of transformation, and we need to share them like we once did around a campfire, around community. It's time for us to get back to the basic love of humanity.
Yeah. Well, that's I don't know if I shared this with you, but when I graduated, my degree was in journalism, and so I worked for the news for a little while, and I thought it would be cool to have a positive news segment, and this was, I don't know, 25 years ago, and yeah, that wasn't what sold news, and so now being able to do this podcast, I speak from my point of view, but I think others are feeling this way now too. As you see the light in people, even the ones that might look dark to many others. It's the same thing that's happening and being mimicked in our world. We had COVID and this divisiveness and all the stuff that's transpired over the last, I think that was birthed from that, these
Mm.
last 5 years. I think I'm, like I said, feeling this way. And I think others are like, I'm just so tired of the same news stories or political divide or Um, my mom always quotes Einstein that says, "You can't solve a problem with the same energy that created the problem." And so I think people are starting to look for the light, and they're not gonna get it from these other sources until they change their ways. And so I'm grateful to, to be able to share stories like yours that are doing just that. And I remember, I had heard you say when you talked about the skinhead story that was, the movie was based on history, American History X. Was that
Mhm,
correct?
mhm.
I that was for the longest time one of the most, gosh, that movie stuck with me, and that one scene, on the curb, like, that was just, that was a very powerful movie back in the day, and to see that, somebody could go from one extreme to the next just shows the potential of the human spirit, truly.
Absolutely, and
Mhm.
TJ never got credit for that movie, but
Mm.
it was based on 95% of his life, and
Yeah.
you're right, that total pendulum swing,
Mhm.
and, I'm glad that you recognize that. In fact, I think a lot of us, like, we're kind of in the middle here and we're squeaking by and we're afraid to have too much, motion because we don't want to be in the pain. But I have noticed that people who have experienced the most darkness have a capacity to hold the most light. And I think because so many of us, COVID and the political divides and other things, we've had to walk in darkness the last 5 years, 6 years, and it's been rough. But, and you said, things starting in around that time, there have been a lot of terrible things that started around that time. But as a student of history, I've looked back through, and there's so many patterns of humans coming to this deep place of darkness, and then a renaissance
Yeah.
on the other side, a new beginning. And, some people have near death experiences and then they will talk about doomsday. That was not my experience. My experience is that God has ultimate faith in humankind. And I think if we come together, those of us, like you said, people are tired of the darkness of the divisiveness. We want to come from so much more of what we have in common and what we love and our children and building a better world. We have that opportunity. I think the opportunity is now.
I agree. I agree. Well, you started off with sharing how you are addicted to stories, and maybe you could also share with the audience, what you do, where they can find you, if they want to learn more about the work you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm on social media, just Bridget Cook Burch. And also, I have a website called Your Inspired Story because I want to hear yours.
Mhm.
And we also have Inspired Legacy Publishing. So we publish stories of transformation. And we have a beautiful writer's retreat that any of your listeners who know they have a story, they just haven't figured out how to get it, out of them onto the page to where it can inspire someone else and change their life. The Inspired Writers Retreat. You can find it at inspiredwritersretreat.com. We do it at a beautiful cabin on the lake, and all stories are welcome there.
No, that sounds amazing. And just you have such a way with words, and I love your voice too. I told you that at the beginning. It's so peaceful. And I also wanted to ask you, I know I'm pivoting and going back a little bit, but when had your experience, you talked about you saw universes, and I just wanted to get your take, if you have one, on what did your experience leave you with the impression of about heaven or time, space, dimension? Do you have a different awareness of that now than you did before?
Oh, yeah. I was so limited before, and, I feel like that experience, like, when truth comes to me, either from science or from spirituality or, wherever it might come, like, I can recognize it. I don't always know what to do with it, but I can recognize it, and it's interesting. There were some recent satellite photos that were given different from Hubble, which is more like a microscope. This new device, this new satellite, is able to give us these broad dimensional images, and they said in one slide there's like 10,000 universes. And it was as if my soul soaked up that information going, "Oh, heck yeah. Like, this is what I know, is that we're ever expanding, but there's so much of creation out there." And I didn't know that. Like, I barely knew about our own little constellation, as the child I was in college. And, anyway, so I would say, yes, I am a very different person, and I would also say, like, in terms of creation and miracles, like, the more open we are, the more we'll have the opportunity to see these in our lives and also in our lifetime.
For sure. Doesn't that, it doesn't sound like it does, but when you tell me about all these, you could see, so many different levels or universes, and I go, "That seems a little scary to me, like, where are we gonna go?" So you don't have that,
Mm-mm.
no, no,
No, it's a
that's for
it's a absolute joy. It is a joy.
yeah.
So,
Well, thank you so much, Bridget, for your time today and for your willingness to share your story and just the beauty that you've seen come out of this experience and that you can now carry on that beauty and see it in other people because as we've said a few times here today, the world needs more of this. So I'm grateful to know you now and know the work that you're doing.
thank you. I feel the same way, Olivia.
Mhm.
Please keep doing these podcasts. And as I mentioned, I love to hear your wisdom and your insight as well. You are a remarkable creature. Thank
Aw,
you for the gift you are.
thank you. I hope today's conversation blessed you and that something that Bridget shared brought some clarity or peace or encouragement to your own journey. And if this episode spoke to you, then please share it with somebody because you never know how these messages of hope can impact somebody else. Thanks for listening, everyone.